Commas, commas, commas. We all know what a comma is, right? And of course we know when to use it, but do we really? That's what we'll talk about today. So what is a comma? A comma is a punctuation mark indicating a pause between parts of a sentence. Commas are also used to separate items in a list and in dates. So today we'll talk about 6 comma usages. The first will be after introductory phrases and clauses, between independent clauses, commas to set off contrasted elements and the positives, and then commas in dates and commas in a series. So first, a comma is recommended after any introductory phrase or clause. An introductory phrase is like a clause, but it doesn't have its own subject and verb. So let's take a look at our first example here. Fighting against reason. It's an introductory phrase to introduce us to what the sentence is saying. So after our introductory phrase, we add a comma and finish the sentence. So fighting against reason, comma, Martha decided to pull an all-nighter in hopes of passing the exam. In our second example, we use the introductory clause. In order to make an A in this class, comma, students must complete all work on time. Now we'll talk about commas between independent clauses. You may have heard about fanboys or coordinating conjunctions. These are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So, when we have two independent clauses, two clauses that can stand alone as sentences on their own, we'll join them together using a comma and a fanboy. So let's take a look at our first example. I wanted to knock on the glass to attract attention. That can be a sentence standing by itself. So can I couldn't move. We'll join the two together with a comma and the word but. I wanted to knock on the glass to attract attention, comma, but I couldn't move. In our second example, the student explained her question is a fine sentence on its own, and so is the instructor still didn't seem to understand. Here we'll join the sentences together with a comma and our fanboy or coordinating conjunction, yet. The student explained her question, yet the instructor still didn't seem to understand. Now we'll talk about commas to set off contrasted elements. Contrasted elements will be two parts of a sentence that are opposite or different. So let's take a look at our first example here. I must govern the clock, not be governed by it. We have governing the clock and we have not being governed by the clock. So we'll use a comma and the word not to set off the contrasted element. In our second example, we have the Cowboys. We have Dak Prescott and Tony Romo, two different quarterbacks. The person who wrote the sentence thinks the Cowboys should continue to start Dak Prescott, comma, not Tony Romo. Our next comma usage will be to set off appositives. An appositive is a specific kind of explanatory word or phrase that identifies or renames a preceding noun or pronoun. So let's take a look at our first example. We have Josh, who is always called on to shoot the last shot. Our appositive, the best player on the team, adds a little more information or renames Josh as the best player on the team. Anytime we have an appositive, it's going to be encased in commas, meaning there's a comma before and a comma after. So Josh, the best player on the team, was always called on to shoot the last shot. Now let's take a look at our second example. Janet learned responsibility at an early age. That's a fine sentence all on its own, but in this example, we want to add some information about Janet or rename her as the oldest of 5 children. So Janet, comma, the oldest of 5 children, comma, learned responsibility at an early age. Now we'll talk about commas and dates. When we're writing a date, a comma is used to separate the date from the month and the date from the year. In our first example here, we have June 19th, 1865. We put a comma after the day and after the year to separate it from the rest of the sentence. June 19th, 1865 was an important day in American history. Our second example adds the day to the month and the year. I was born on Tuesday, May 4th, 1993. When you're giving only a month and a year, you don't need a comma. So let's look at our third example. I haven't seen the Cowboys win a Super Bowl since February 1996. A comma isn't needed here at all because we're only giving a month and a year. Our last usage is a comma in a series. In this usage, the comma separates a series of words, phrases, or independent clauses. So in our first example, we have an entree. For your entree, which is an introductory phrase, which we talked about earlier, and the comma follows it, you may choose vegetarian pasta, beef, chicken, or salmon. The comma here is used just like an or would be. So you may choose vegetarian pasta or beef or chicken or salmon. But because we don't want to use or so many times in a sentence, we use a comma. In our next example, Jane will bring the food, Jose will bring the drinks, John will bring the music, and Jackie will bring the guests. Each person is bringing something different, so it's a list. So we separate each item on the list with a comma. Our last example, I'm taking art history, Russian literature, microeconomics, and macroeconomics next semester. We use a comma in between each subject that the student will take next semester. That was just a brief overview of comma usages.